Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sprint 199 review. This was a normal 2-week sprint. Let's get started. I'll start with the overview, Jeffrey on the UI, Adam on providers, Joe on the platform, and Keenan on the API. As you can see, with the PRs merged this sprint, it was relatively consistent with the last couple sprints. We got a lot of enhancements going. We're trying to wrap up features for the Oparin branch. We had stabilized the Oparin branch for an initial sort of beta internal thing, and now we've merged master in to get the rest of the features in. We'll start stabilizing that again. So you should see the enhancements come down and the bugs start going up as we move forward. And over to Jeffrey with the UI.
Hey, good morning. So in this sprint, 13 PRs got merged into the UI Classic repo, out of which 5 are bugs, 2 are enhancements, and a few others. Can explain about them in the following slides. This PR is for a partial fix. When you open the provision instance pages, an error pops up because a helper method was not included in the VM Cloud helper during one of the conversion tasks. So after adding that particular helper method, this issue got fixed. Next slide. As you can see in the screenshot, there was an error when we changed the providers in new storage manager. The Auto SD team had fixed it, but David had reverted the changes as they were not being recognized by the DDF forms. Next slide. When you click on the overview link in the container dashboard's breadcrumb, the URL was not correct. This was corrected by adding the correct path for the overview link. Next slide. During the page load, there was an XHR request for the IBM Plex font, which resulted in a delayed page load during air gap conditions. This PR removed the URL references and made sure that all the PNG charts are all working as expected. Next slide. An issue was reported that the user was getting confused on what to do next when we select an image from the provisioning instance page. This is because the continue and cancel button was not displayed on the initial screen and it was way below. So we added a CSS to in certain style sheet changes were made and displayed the continue and cancel button always at the bottom of the screen. Next slide. The AutoSD team added a host initiator group field to the host initiator form. This enables choosing an existing host group from the specified storage systems, or we can choose none from this group. Next slide. Under compute cloud instances, we had the resize VM form, which was in Angular, and this was converted to React. Next slide. And for the others, the Terser package was updated from 4.1.2 to 4.8.1, and the D3 color package was converted from 3.0.1 to 3.1.0. Under the add new physical storage form, there was a props validation error in console. The AutoSD team had fixed by adjusting some of the variable names to make it look in camel case. And for the last one, the AutoSD team added a regular expression validation in the host initiator form to accept hexadecimals in the WWPNs. That's all from my end. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So this sprint, the Power team, specifically Eliza, a new developer there, refactored the VM resize operations methods in core to be able to use DDF as we transition away from the previous form to the new DDF-driven forms. We also disabled syndication of inventory events and metrics by default. Previously, we were doing this automatically if you had Kafka installed, but as we start to use Kafka for other things, we didn't want to automatically do this, as it would be a relatively high waste if it's not something you wanted to make use of. For Amazon, we got rid of some deprecation warnings by going to using keyword args for lazy find, which is something that the inventory refresh gem is going to be deprecating soon. For Google, we fixed a refresh error when parsing a region level cloud volume. So we're trying to pull out the availability zone from the cloud volume. But if it's not in an AZ, it's up at the region level, it was failing because that property didn't exist. So we now handle that case. Next slide. For IBM Cloud, they added a placement group option to Power VS provisioning in the back end, so that allows you to select from a dropdown, where before you had to type in the placement group manually because it wasn't easy value out of the database. But now that we are collecting them properly, it makes it a lot easier. Eliza added support for VM resize to Power VS VMs. This is what triggered the move over to DDF, and so she got some good experience doing that refactoring in core, as well as adding the support to Power VS. And Jay fixed the Power VS IP address validation in provisioning form. It looked like it was required, but it wasn't actually, and so we just had to fix that up in the dialog YAML. A lot of enhancements in HMC this sprint. So they improve collection time if there are some disconnected hosts in inventory by using an API call that gets the summary of all the hosts first, and then they can skip collecting the specific hosts if any of them are disconnected. Previously, it would try to collect detailed information from every host and hit the HTTP timeout if it was disconnected. So now they're skipping any that are disconnected, so you don't have to hit that timeout. They're also ignoring some relevant HMC events that aren't being used for really anything useful. You could wonder why they're being raised by HMC in the first place, but this should cut down on some of the event traffic that we're collecting. They're also collecting SE and trunk adapters, which are some network adapters for hosts. They're also collecting the CPU speed for hosts and VMs, and they are mapping HMC shared processor pools to the ManageIQ resource pools model. Next slide. For Power VC, we added server groups to the VCR. So OpenStack started collecting server groups. And so since Power VC is a subclass, we had to start adding that to the VCR since they're being picked up automatically now. For Terraform, Jay from the Power team actually fixed a few icons that he noticed were wrong in the IBM Terraform repo. So some of the IBM public cloud resources were using the standard IBM logo as opposed to the IBM cloud logo. So we fixed those. OpenStack, Eliza refactored the OpenStack's VM resize method to use the new DDF parameters that were added in core and in Power. Next slide. For VMware, Keenan finally got to something we've been wanting to do for quite a long time, and are using batches of 250 VMs for Kappa-New metrics capture for VMware. Previously, this was using one queue message per resource, and now we're batching it up for much higher performance, but I'm sure we'll talk about that later in core. We continue dropping the deprecated dual hash argument mode for lazy find. We added, this is an interesting one. So we noticed in a user environment, they were calling VM targeted refresh from Automate, from their automation code. And because VMware uses streaming refresh, we didn't have anything that said targeted refresh was allowed, which meant that when you tried to queue a targeted refresh, even though it wasn't necessary, it was actually doing a full, which restarted the collector, which was extremely inefficient. So now, even though targeted refresh doesn't do anything, we say that it's allowed so that you won't be queuing a full refresh if you try to queue a targeted from Automate. So that was just a little thing, but it ended up having big consequences for that user. And then what we found out of that was if you were constantly queuing a full refresh and trying to restart your collector, occasionally the collector thread would not shut down in a timely manner, specifically if it was doing its first full. And so it was possible to end up with more than one collector thread running. So now we hard kill the collector thread if it doesn't shut down in a timely manner to prevent that. We also fixed an issue with some symbol versus string key issues going from the old event parser to the new one. Ended up with the events not being linked up to VMs in the non-Rails event catcher, but got that fixed up, and so that's working properly now. And that is it for providers. Over to Joe.
Okay, this sprint we had many core enhancements, so please visit each of the links for more information, as I can't go over all of them. First, Brandon upgraded many things to UBI 9, but ultimately we had to revert some of them. And we'll revisit in the future when we have the build environments and we can resolve the dependency issues we ran into. Next, I updated the container Postgres image to Postgres 13. Adam and Nassar had several changes around the messaging configuration. Nassar already also added the messaging ready to the EVM Serverd service. So now the EVM Serverd will not start unless the messaging is available. This will be enforced when we actually require messaging on master. So we have some coordination there. Frank and I updated the translations. For the next slide, we have part 2 of enhancements. As Adam already mentioned, Keenan made several performance improvements in the metrics capture. Brandon made several changes in the area of building and pushing RPMs to S3, including automated builds and pushes. Jason made a few enhancements around building the ManageIQ Ansible VENV package. Brandon's bot chipped in and updated Go dependencies in Podify. And Brandon made changes to follow the operator SDK upgrade guide for version 1.2.5. Next slide. For bugs, Brandon made some corrections to the container Postgres README, and he fixed an issue when trying to install the TZ data RPM. Adam fixed a bug that occurred if we tried to subscribe to a Kafka topic before it's published. Nassar fixed issues in the messaging configuration and the ManageIQ messaging ready, where localhost would fail SSL handshaking. This was changed to 127.0.0.1. Brandon fixed some missing HTTP configuration for the monolithic container that was preventing that from starting. Jason fixed lots of noise when building the ManageIQ RPMs. That noise was coming from the Pi3 shebang fix. And finally, Brandon found that newer versions of SMEM were available in EPEL 8 and 9, so he removed them all. So we no longer have those copies in our repository. Next slide.
Okay, great. So over the API, Elise added 2 changes. One was adding the resize capability on VMs, and then swept through the whole file, added localization to make it easier to work. We embedded some variables. So definitely above and beyond on helping out the make that file nice and clean. Okay, that's all for the API side.
All right, and that's the end of our Sprint 199 review. Next sprint is the Sprint 200 review, which will be on November 16th at the usual place and time. And I'd like to thank all the presenters today, thank all the contributors to the ManageIQ project, thank our community members for trying out versions and finding bugs and asking questions. And if you have any questions or need anything, head over to our discussions group on GitHub or manageiq.org. And that's it. We'll see you next time for number 200.